WUJM, St. Petersburg.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Doctors in the House Health Show on 99.1 FM, WUJM, St. Petersburg Community Radio. We have an excellent program for you tonight. Please stay tuned. Hello, hello. Good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Doctors in the House, your health show. This is a show about wellness, mental health, and disease prevention. I am Dr. Morency, your host. You're tuning to 99.1 FM, WUGM, St. Petersburg, Florida. And if you're listening online at 99gemstheberg.com, welcome as well. We have a great show for you tonight. Before we start, so if you have any question or concern, you can call us at 727-637-2416. Great show for you tonight. The topic is a new paradigm for mental illness. In other words, all the things we've been doing in the past, we're going to probably look at other new standard, okay? There's a new field called nutritional psychiatry. It is a new field full of hope and promise. So my folks, listen, I have the pleasure tonight of bringing you some of this cutting edge information regarding the evaluation and treatment of mental illness. Now, for the past decade or so, there's been a lot of research going on in the field of nutrition and psychiatry. This nutritional psychiatry is the new kid on the block. This has a lot of potential of improving the life of so many people, including those suffering with recalcitrant, resistant mental illness. And so far, the preliminary and anecdotal report shows that there's really reason for hope and optimism. So to me as a physician, this is signaling that there is a new paradigm in the understanding and treatment of mental illness that is emerging. Please, pay attention, all right, today. So in this program, first, I'm going to continue our discussion we had the last time on the many risks of ultra-processed food that we had started in June. And I will also touch on the research is going on in the field of this nutritional psychiatry. And in the second half of the show, I have the pleasure of having Dr. Brittany Peters coming back to the show. She'll be on the phone to join me to discuss those new developments, her opinion about what we're talking about tonight. As you recall, she is a clinical licensed social worker with master level certification in addiction psychiatry, and she is the clinical director and owner of the Center for Wellness and Clinical Development, LLC. I will look forward to have that discussion with her. But until then, let's review. I know you probably heard this if you listen to my show, but it's worth talking about because ultra-processed food, there's a lot to cover about that. So if you recall the last show, we discussed the impact of ultra-processed food on our body. I explained that the proliferation and dominance of ultra-processed food in the last decade or so, particularly the increased consumption of this food, have resulted in the rise of obesity, which, as you know, is the main driver of the epidemic of chronic disease, most notably diabetes. You hear like everybody you know as an adult has diabetes, heart disease, stroke, certain form of cancer. They're all connected. And those chronic diseases are the leading cause of death and disability in the United States. Obesity is also associated with a lot of other disease conditions: inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease, sleep apnea, breathing difficulty, you name it. Prior to 1970, only 13% of the U.S. adult population and 5% of the U.S. children were obese. Today, the U.S. adult obesity rate have risen to 42.4% and getting worse. And our children have gone from 5 to 10 to 17% rate of obesity. It is a problem. Diabetes now is an epidemic proportion by all the statistics there. So the case for the link between ultra-processed food and irreversible damage to our body is totally undeniable. There's nobody expert on there who can deny this fact. So last time, because of time constraint, and this is such a big subject, we didn't dwell on the effect of obesity on mental health, except to say that obesity does lead to poor health outcome and a decreased quality of life. But when I looked further to prepare for this show and listening to some of the experts on the field, it seems like mental illness has had a parallel track and timeline as those diseases we just mentioned, okay? Because mental illness as well was at an epidemic level way before the pandemic started. Obviously, it's worse now. So there is substantial evidence that shows that ultra-processed food, thus obesity, is a major contributing factor to the increase of mental illnesses. So why don't we drill on ultra-processed food again, if you just to kind of trick your memory a little bit, because it's that important. When you look at it, if you look at the groups of processed food, you have the whole food, unprocessed or minimally processed food, which are your vegetables and fruit. And in the center, you have the number 2, you have group 2 is the processed food, which is basically those vegetables and fruit, but now they are in can. Okay, the legume, because they have to, manufacture them and then put them on can. Okay, and at the far end is the ultra processed food. Those food are processed food that are so chemically altered, there's no nutrient left in them, nothing precious, nothing natural that would help our body that's left on them. They tend to contain lots of added sugar, and this, I'll repeat this one again, high fructose corn syrup. That's one of the big culprits. Those foods tend to be high in salt, high in fat, especially the trans fat, which the manufacturer actually construct themselves. Those foods are low in fiber, which is essential for our healthy gut and our own natural bacteria. And they are high in calorie. In addition, they're full of artificial ingredients. Many of those chemicals that are used as preservative, artificial coloring, flavoring, textures. So before I go on, let me just recite for you a few of those, ultra-processed food. Those are your pops and fruit drinks, sweet and savory packaged snack like cookies, candies, and cake mix, mass-produced packaged bread and bun, margarine spread, breakfast cereal and energy bar, energy drink, instant soup, sauce, noodles, poultry and fish nuggets, hot dog, many ready-to-eat products, those pre-prepared pies, the pasta and the pizza dish, just to name a few, but you're familiar. This is something when you get into a supermarket or local store, you see it full of, okay? Now, this is the problem. The problem is those added sugar, particularly sugar and the simple carbohydrate, are quickly absorbed into your system when you eat, causing a rapid rise in glucose and insulin. And this phenomenon is what creates the condition called insulin resistant, because the more you eat, consume those sugars, those sweets, the more your insulin rise, and they tend to lead to compulsive eating, binging, craving, ultimately, which can result in addicting behavior. I mean, that's clear. Part of the brain loves the sugar. They see the sugar as a reward, okay? So when you overeat sugar, you are reinforcing that behavior. And eventually that leads to the depletion of some of your neurotransmitter in the brain, the one associated with pleasure, dopamine, which actually is the key for addiction. Bottom line is, I know some of you are going to say, what are you going to eat? But occasionally, if you eat those things, ultra-processed food, it may not necessarily be a problem. But if they are your regular source of nutrition, you got a problem. Okay? It may be that's all you can afford. I hope not. But God, you have to be careful. Because some of those things, they are created in such a way that they force you to actually overeat. Okay? So what is the science behind this? As I mentioned before in the introduction, those research have been going on for a long time. One of the pioneers in the field of nutritional psychiatry is Dr. Phyllis Jacka, J-A-C-K-A. She was the lead. She led the group of investigators at the University of Melbourne in Australia to conduct one of the biggest study looking for the effect of food on women over a decade ago. And the result of that large study showed that women who regularly consume the so-called traditional diet, Mediterranean diet, were less likely to have major depression, dysthymia, which is a minor depression, and anxiety disorder, as compared to those folks who consume a Western diet. In addition, the Western diet was found to be associated with a 50% increase in the likelihood of having depression. So this lady really started the whole process of the nutritional psychiatry. She was the founder and president of International Society of Psychiatric Research. She had a famous book, which if you're interested, you can really, for more information, her book is called Brain Changer, How Diet Can Save Your Mental Health. So that we know we have to consider the food we eat as the basis of our brain and mental health throughout our life. So the field of nutritional psychiatry has progressed, and because of the growing evidence of this study in the past that suggested that dietary improvement might not only improve our mood, but also treat some of the common and severe mental illness. All right? So at the present time, there's a flurry of Department of Nutritional Psychiatry that have been created by some of the best medical institutions in the country. For example, at Stanford University in California, Dr. Shibani Sethi, I've listened to her. She's a specialist in obesity and psychiatry, and she's the founder of the Department of Metabolic Psychiatry. She's doing interesting research focusing on the influence of metabolic disease such as diabetes, obesity, and the like. Her observation is that once the metabolic conditions have improved, so actually they bring those people to the metabolic clinic, not the psychiatric clinic, and she found that once some of their disease, the diabetic is under control, they lose weight, the fatty liver is resolved, they actually feel better. Their mental conditions tend to disappear. Okay? So the underlying principle of this and the hypothesis that has been put forth is that metabolic conditions such as type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, obesity, fatty liver, insulin resistant create a lot of inflammation throughout the body. And in the past, we thought the brain was protected because there is a barrier that prevents circulation to go to the brain, but that's not the case. So those inflammations can be leaked to the brain, and when you have an inflamed brain, that's how it manifests itself by some of those mental illness. So it's not just having psychological issue, because there are many reasons for mental illness, but definitely now we find that food play a major role in that. So this is interesting stuff, folks, okay? And, there's more to come, but I'm going to keep you aware of some of the new development. But right now, that's an option that probably should have a lot of potentials, okay? I wish when I was practicing physician, I never realized there was such a concept, which not too long ago, that eating healthy whole food and avoid excess junk food will help prevent chronic disease, including mental illness, and ultimately premature life. So as I said, I'm going to really try to reach Dr. Peters on the phone so we can discuss some of those new development.
Dr. Morency, how are you?
Dr. Peters, how are you doing?
I am well. I'm so excited, and I appreciate you having me back on your show. This is a really important topic.
Oh yes. No, I have been, because last time we touched on nutrition a little bit, and then subsequent reading I've done and listened to some of the experts out there, and I realized, by God, there's more to this than I expected, and I was pleasantly surprised to see this. So I said, man, let me touch base with you. You're a young practitioner. You have all this knowledge, and you have a clinic where you see some of the folks who are probably the most at risk for this condition.
Yeah. It was very interesting. Earlier on in my career, I remember going to a client's home, and she didn't really want to let me in. But once we got in, what I saw was probably, and you've met me, I'm fairly short, but maybe waist high of cans of ravioli and Mountain Dew soda cans everywhere, right? And so I talked to her a little bit about this concept of how her depression shows up, right? Which is that she's depressed and this is her food when she's depressed, but also considering talking with her primary care, right? About how that food that she's eating may be affecting her body, right? And probably increasing these depressive symptoms that she's having, right? So I think that that mind-body connection is so very important, especially when we consider what it is that we put in our bodies, And so I want to acknowledge, as I listened to you and as I prepped in preparation for this show, there's a lot. So I want to acknowledge that it can be hard for individuals to consider changing their diet for a lot of reasons. So, for those that are listening, don't feel you have to make drastic changes all at once, but you can make gradual changes, right? Talking with your physician, potentially talking with a dietitian, or slowly getting into eating more naturally grown foods, right? We acknowledge that many people live in areas where they don't have access to healthy food stores. So there is a 42 block of South St. Pete where there's not a full service grocery store. So that issue definitely impacts individuals who may be listening who say that they want to buy things that are different, right? So when we're low income, or even we just don't know how to shop. And so... Absolutely.
For a long time, I had asked myself why there were so many patients with mental illness in my practice. And, lucky for me, I had a pretty good training at Rutgers, because they had one of the best behavioral training program there. And so I was not afraid as a primary care physician to tackle mental illness, anxiety, depression, which are very, very common. But at that time, we were basically, busy primary care physicians. Once they confirm that they have depression, and you find some drugs, some SSRIs, and God, we are guilty of not having enough information on nutrition, because we didn't study in medical school, actually, really. So I found this fascinating.
Well, in society too, right? Because if you think about our K through 12 education, we get, a little bit of nutrition in home ec, but they don't really talk a lot about it. So it falls down to like our family and cultural norms. And so I always share, you know, as raised country, so we did a lot of game and high fatty foods, gravy and pork. And it's just how I was raised. So we want to acknowledge that many people, it is how we were raised, but it doesn't mean that we can't switch our diets, because there have been some studies, and I think Harvard put out an article that showed individuals who have a more balanced, like a Mediterranean diet.
Yes.
They have depression. Their risk for depression is lower by about 25 to 35%.
Oh, absolutely.
And eating those traditional diets, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how can I improve and be happier and manage my anxiety? And we know, I heard you talk about the high processed foods. It really boils down to the sugar intake, right?
That's the sugar.
And so
The killer is the sugar.
Oh, I don't eat sweets.
Yeah.
But you eat a lot of bread, right? And carbs turn to
oh my
sugar.
God. I'm wondering, God, I used to have some chicken nuggets one time. I said, what's in there really? I mean, most of the nutrients are gone from the food, some of those food. You know, people have had competition in how to make the best pineapple upside down cake and banana cake and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But and this is the problem. This is the point. I'm sure you're aware of that. And that's why it's so difficult. The sugar. This doctor I mentioned, Dr. Shiboni Sethi, which at Stanford, she mentioned that people actually use sugar as a recreational food because there's really no, I mean, we have our normal carbohydrate from whole food, okay? And then you have some processed food which still have some natural ingredient, but they're not full of those excess sugar and the drink, the soda pops. But now the pathway to addiction is actually being worked on, because right now, from what I understand, the more you consume of the sugars, the more you actually deplete your source of your dopamine level in your brain, which is the key, one of the key
to addiction, that reward pathway.
I know
right?
you do addiction, yeah. So
So it's interesting because again, many people don't think about how we only have one body, so it's playing a role in many things that we need to do on a daily basis. Our sleep, and so even when you're talking about that, most of the time when I talk to my clients about eating and how I ask them, how does your depression show up in how you dress or how you eat. They don't think about that stress, right? Is that when you're stressed, do you buy stress food, right? Do you go, I'm really craving this sugary thing? And what happens with that, right? Because now your body, as you said earlier, it's creating a sense of, well, I need that again. I have to keep doing that. And then what is it doing to us in the long run? It's wearing and tearing on our systems.
Well, exactly, and those they call a comfort food, but they're not really. They're not comfortable. They're not comfortable for the body because you pay a big price for it. As a matter of fact, one of the articles that I saw is that during the pandemic, people were buying tons of those foods.
Tons of those food and alcohol stocks went up.
Well,
people were drinking more as well.
Correct, but I don't even want to go with alcohol because that's another subject completely.
Well, you said it was linked to addiction to sugar, so we cannot neglect that.
I know, and I have some encounter with patients with obesity when you suggest that they would go into a low-carb diet, and there was some... As a matter of fact, Dr. Shiboni is actually using the ketogenic diet to treat some of the recalcitrant mental illness. Actually, she had some anecdotal case about treating schizophrenia with a ketogenic diet, and which is like, wow, this is amazing. Now, let me ask you this question about your demographic, your practice, though. What is the percentage of racial demography in your practice? I mean,
it's very interesting. I have all Black and brown individuals in my practice that I'm treating now. It's a great space to be in. I really love that. But what I'll say is that it's new since the pandemic, right? So I think I had an even caseload, as I like to say. But now I have men, women, but all Black and brown, a higher, I range from, individuals who are low income to higher income. So, it just speaks to, remembering that mental health does not discriminate, and that people do need help. I want to say, and I know we're talking about this, and I always like to be mindful, that we have a range of listeners, but if you are listening and you're going, how can I do this? I want to make it practical, right? Is that you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money on, crazy diets, things like that. Start small. One of the things that I did, I am actually pescatarian now, but I started very small with saying, you know what, I'm always going to eat fresh vegetables, right? And it means that I have to cook a little more, but, I grew up on canned foods, right? And so once I got used to that, when someone tried to offer me maybe green beans out the can, I could taste the difference, and it didn't. My palate changed, right? Yeah. So start small with, giving up small things, right? Maybe you don't eat beef anymore. Maybe you don't do pork once a week. So considering those small changes can really make a larger difference. And as your body gets used to it, you start craving more to improve on it. So, I know it can be overwhelming to think that someone's saying, hey, if you change your diet, you can change your mental health. And then with all that's going on and people's income changing, but really start small. No one who has changed their diet has done so overnight. Usually it is a gradual change.
This is one of the biggest yes. Changes you got to make, because some of us really grew up with this stuff. And if you started as a younger age, it is very, very challenging to, to get rid of this overnight. And the other thing is also, it's be able to access, to be afford, to have those, to afford those healthy food, the whole food.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a big challenge for, primary care doctor and, folks on the front line like yourself, when you really may not have a lot of time in your hand, but you see those patients, what the real reason is. And then you have to settle for, well, okay, we'll take it one change at a time, because that's the only way you can do that. But my thing to folks is really, I want them to actually be aware of this, because some of those things is actually, I wouldn't say premeditated, but the big food industry love to market the stuff and they love to sell it.
Yeah.
And they advertise to minority folks.
As they do. It is very systemic. And so I think that's important. That's why I wanted to make sure that I brought up that 42 block in South St. Pete, right, that does not have a full service grocery store. And what that means, when you're seeing chain grocery stores not in certain areas, and you're seeing, high rates of mental health or poverty, you're not giving people access to what they need. And so that's a point of, what are our city officials doing and what are our county officials doing to make sure that everyone has access.
Yeah, because, even now I'm understanding things more, because there was a lot of connection between type 2 diabetes and depression. And but I didn't know the mechanism at this point, because mental illness was in a different department, because we have this we've inherited this from Descartes. We separated the body into just the mind in one place, and the entire body is made. You have the same cells all over the place, very well connected. It's one unit. And that's why the last time when I talked to you, you said you try to utilize an holistic approach to this. Well, that's the way, because otherwise what happens is you superficially, you do what you have to do, but you don't do your patients a lot of service by not paying attention to the stuff. So as soon as I get those information, I pass it on. That's the only thing I can do now that I have been retired. And I took a lot of pride, just study the stuff and come up, because things like obesity, the type 2 diabetes, which all over the place. I mean, every adult you see, I mean, when I go to the hospital, I was going to the hospital for some blood work for my routine physical, and they asked me what medication I'm taking. I said, well, I am not taking any diabetes medication. Said, you don't have diabetes? I said, no, I don't have diabetes yet. It's in my family.
It's in my family. Yeah. And it's important. That blood work is really important. I always share with my clients, I was diagnosed as pre-diabetic probably when I was at about 28, 27.
Okay.
But I changed my diet and I was able to get below, right? And so that was really good because I knew that I did not want to become diabetic. It runs in my family. I'm small. Like, I really wanted to still lead a healthy lifestyle, and I didn't want to be on those medications. And so I knew I had to make a change. And so it's important that, you know, a lot of times people go, well, your appearance looks healthy, but that you really go for your routine checkups because, again, it's all connected, right? What our blood is doing, what our body is doing, it's all connected, and you may appear fine or think that you're fine, but your body may be saying, and that's where you got to let the, you know, professionals like you read that and say, okay, this is happening. You need to cut down on certain things.
Yeah, and it turned out that we may not necessarily, I mean, because we certainly zero in on people with obesity, unfortunately, but there are a lot of people who have an insulin resistance that are not necessarily obese. And what we're not doing generally is actually, you know, do fasting insulin level just to track the stuff and to be aware that, you know, those interventions, so you got to go a little further.
Yeah.
Like that. But
I had a great practitioner at that time because I told him, I said, well, what do I need to change? And so he was like, you know, eat more of this, work out more, do these things. And so I really took hold of that. But I recognize it's very hard. It was hard for me, and it's still hard, right? But I've come so far from where I was. And so that's what I want people to know is that, you know, you're going to struggle a little bit, but it's okay. But when you're talking about your mental health, you really want to challenge yourself because, again, even those meds that we're taking, sometimes they have side effects too. And so a lot of people find that they become dissatisfied or that their bodies are changing. And so one thing that we can control is what we're eating.
Yes. And this is fascinating. I'm glad that you basically on top of this. And obviously, since I had our last show when you talk about a holistic approach to mental illness, I said, well, you are right. The right provider for the clients out there because there's so many simple things. And then the other thing, when you pay attention to those lifestyle aspects, it kind of prevents you from really giving a lot of unnecessary medication to those folks. And then kind of label them. Because if, say, somebody has obesity and they have the insulin resistance and they suffer from depression, they may not necessarily have a primary depression. And just now you can actually go and try to tackle their metabolic problems and with encouragement, you know, weight loss and all those things, and nutritions and then as opposed to just, I mean, I was in a seminar about a movie on mental health, and one of the member in the panel says that people are actually fighting back against labeling them prematurely with all those conditions when there might be something else underneath.
Yeah, very true.
One more. So my main question for you really is that. So your opinion, your thoughts on this new trend in nutritional metabolic psychiatry. You are on board, right? Any objections or anything you may be concerned about?
I am very on board with people taking control of their health. So what I will say is that even when I was doing my doctoral studies, they introduced us to research that showed that, you know, even walking sometimes works better than your depression meds. And so I won't say it's a one size fits all, right? Sure. I don't want anybody listening to go get off their meds. Always talk to your provider.
No.
But what I am saying is that it is not just as simple as taking a medication. You can also do things like be active, walking, getting out in the sun, and also you can control what you eat, right? Choose to eat better. And all of those things combined, right? Holistic combined will help you improve, right? Some people will be able to improve their mental health absent of meds. And if you're early on and you're able to catch it and you monitor it and you come familiar with your symptoms and your triggers, you know, with the help of a therapist, you can really monitor your symptoms for what it is that you need to maintain a positive mental health state.
Dr. Peters, I think the time is really not in our favor here. My assistant is looking at me, so we're going to have to really listen. I really appreciate you coming to the show and discuss this with me. It's a pleasure, and I wish you good luck in what you're doing. And any chance I get, I'll just give you a buzz to see where you are, and if we can have any other show for this community, that would be a good thing to do. So thank you very much. So I'm gonna summarize here so I can switch to the different program. I appreciate you, Dr. Peter.
Yeah, no, anytime. We will connect again.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the summary about the new development on the, actually it's not new development, but it's the new trend on nutritional psychiatry, where we can use food and both as a prevention of mental illness and also as a treatment of some of those chronic resistant mental illness we may be amenable to, especially if you have underlying condition such as type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, obesity, because those are tough to deal with. So I hope this information has been valuable to you. And please, if you have any question, as I say in the beginning, give us a call for feedback at 727-637-2416.